Hello and welcome to listeners. This is a series of Mahatma Gandhi letters, an approach to understand Mahatma Gandhi's life through the letters he has written. Dear listeners, Mahatma Gandhi moved to London in 1888 to study law at the Inner Temple. His time in London was significant for several reasons. Gandhi faced challenges adapting to British culture, particularly in terms of societal norms and lifestyle. He enrolled in law school, focused on his studies, and passed his exams, although he struggled initially with the British legal system and academic lifestyle. During his time, Gandhi embraced vegetarianism, influenced by his religious beliefs and the efforts of the Vegetarian Society. He often dined with other vegetarians and engaged in discussions about their beliefs. Living in London exposed Gandhi to political ideas and movements that shaped his future advocacy for social justice and civil rights. He began writing for Indian newspapers, outlining issues concerning Indians in Britain, which honed his skills as a communicator. His experiences in London influenced his later activism, ultimately shaping his approach to leading India's independence movement. Overall, Gandhi's time in London was a formative period that expanded his worldview and laid the groundwork for his future as a leader. After all these, best summarizing of Gandhi's life in London was an article published in a journal called The Vegetarian. This article is called Why He Went to England. To enable Englishmen to appreciate the difficulties confronting Hindus intending to proceed to England for studies, and to point out to such Hindus how the difficulties might be overcome, a representative of the Vegetarian put Gandhi a number of questions bearing on the subject and asked him to reply to them at length. Questions and answers are given below. Mr. Gandhi was first asked what was the reason which first induced him to think of coming over to England and adopting the legal profession. In a word, ambition. I matriculated at the Bombay University in the year 1887. Then I joined the Bhavnagar College, for unless you graduate at the Bombay University, you get no status in society. If you want any employment before that, cannot secure unless, of course, you have a very good influence to back you up, a respectable post, giving a handsome salary. But I found that I would have to spend 3 years at the least before I could graduate. Moreover, I suffered from constant headaches and nose bleeding, and this was supposed to be due to the hot climate. And after all, I could not, even after graduating, expect any very great income. While I was incessantly brooding over these things, an old friend of my father saw and advised me to go to England and take the robe. He, as it were, fanned the fire that was burning within me. I thought to myself, if I go to England, not only shall I become a barrister, whom I used to think a great deal, but I shall be able to see England, the land of philosophers and poets, the very center of civilization. This gentleman had great influence with my elders, and so he succeeded in persuading them to send me to England. This is a very brief statement of my reasons for coming to England, but they by no means represent my present views. The next question was, of course, your friends were all delighted at your ambitious purpose? Well, not all. There are friends and friends. Those who were my real friends, and of about my age, were very glad to hear that I was to go to England. Some were friends, or rather, well-wishers, old in years. These sincerely believed that I was going to ruin myself, and that I would be a disgrace to my family by going to England. Others, however, set up their opposition simply from malice. They had seen some of the barristers who derived fabulous incomes, and they were afraid that I might do the same. Some, again, there were, who thought that I was too young, I am now about 22, or that I should not be able to bear the climate. To cut the matter short, no two persons supported or opposed my coming on the same grounds. Next question asked was, how did you set about carrying out your intention? Just tell me, if you please, what were your difficulties, and how you overcame them. Even to try to tell you the story of my difficulties would fill up the whole of your valuable paper. It is a tale of misery and woe. The difficulties may well be likened to the heads of Ravan, the giant of the second great Hindu epic Ramayana, whom Rama, the hero, fought and ultimately defeated, which were many, and which were no sooner chopped off than replaced. They may be divided chiefly under 4 heads, like money, consent of my elders, separation from relations, and caste restrictions. First, then, as to money. Though my father was the prime minister of more than one native state, he never hoarded money. He spent all that he earned in charity and the education and marriages of his children, so we were practically left without much cash. He left some property, and that was all. When asked why he did not collect money and set it aside for his children, he used to say that his children represented his wealth, and if he hoarded much money, he would spoil them. So then, money was no small difficulty in my way. I tried for some state scholarship but failed. At one place, I was asked to prove my worth by graduating and then expect it. Experience teaches me that the gentleman who said so was right. Nothing daunted, I requested my eldest brother to devote all the money that was left to my education in England. Here, I cannot help digressing to explain the family system that prevails in India. There, unlike as in England, the children always, if male, and until marriage, female, live with their parents. What they earn goes to the father, and so also what they lose is a loss to the father. Of course, even the male children do separate under exceptional circumstances, like in the case of a great quarrel, but these are the exception. In the legal language of Maine, individual property is the rule in the West, corporate property is the rule in the East. So then, I have and had no property of my own. Everything was under the control of my brother, and we were all living together. To return to the question of money, what little my father could leave for me was in the hands of my brother. It could only be set free subject to his consent. Moreover, that was not enough. So I proposed that the whole capital should be devoted to my education. I ask you if any brother would do so here. There are very few such brothers in India. He was told that I might prove an unworthy brother after imbibing the Western ideas, and that the only chance of regaining the money would be in my returning alive to India, which was very doubtful. But he turned a deaf ear to all these reasonable and well-meant warnings. There was one, and only one condition attached to the consent to my proposal, that I should get the permission of my mother and my uncle. May many persons have such brothers as mine. I then set about the allotted task, which I can assure you was uphill enough. Fortunately, I was the pet of my mother. She had much faith in me, and so I succeeded in getting over her superstition. But how was I to make her nod consent to a 3 years separation? However, by showing the exaggerated advantages of coming to England, I got her to accede, with much reluctance, to my request. Now for the uncle. He was on the point of going to Benares and such other holy places. After 3 days' incessant persuasion and arguments, I could get the following answer from him. I am going on a pilgrimage. What you say may be right, but how could I willingly say yes to your unholy proposal? The only thing I can say is that, if your mother does not mind your going, I have no right to interfere. This was easily interpreted into yes. Nor were these the only two whom I had to please. In India, everyone, no matter how remotely connected, thinks that he has a right to poke his nose into another's affairs. But when I had exacted, where it was nothing else, acquiescence from the two, the pecuniary difficulties almost disappeared. The difficulties under the second head, partially discussed above. You will perhaps be astonished to hear that I am married. The marriage took place at the age of 12. Small blame then to my wife's parents if they thought that they had a right to interfere only for the sake of their daughter. Who was to look after her? How was she to manage to spend the 3 years? Of course she was to be looked after by my brother, or brother. According to my ideas at that time, I should have taken little notice of their legitimate fears and growlings, had it not been that their displeasure would have been reflected on my mother and brother. It was no easy task to sit night after night with my father-in-law and to hear and successfully answer his objection. But then I was taught the old proverb, patience and perseverance overcome mountains, too well to give way. When I had the money and the requisite permission, I said to myself, how am I to persuade myself to separate from all that is dear and near to me? In India, we fight shy of separation. Even when I had to go for a few days, my mother would weep. How, then, was I to witness, without being affected, a heart-rending scene? It is impossible for me to describe the tortures that my mind had to suffer. As the day of leave-taking drew near, I nearly broke down. But I was wise enough not to say this, even to my closest friends. I knew that my health was failing. Sleeping, waking, drinking, eating, walking, running, reading, I was dreaming and thinking of England and what I would do on that momentous day. At last the day came. On the one hand, my mother was hiding her eyes full of tears in her hands, but the sobbing was clearly heard. On the other, I was placed among a circle of some 50 friends. If I wept, they would think me too weak. Perhaps they would not allow me to go to England, soliloquized me. Therefore, I did not weep, even though my heart was breaking. Last but not least came the leave-taking with my wife. It would be contrary to custom for me to see or talk to her in the presence of friends, so I had to see her in a separate room. She, of course, had begun sobbing long before. I went to her and stood like a dumb statue for a moment. I kissed her and she said, "Don't go." What followed I need not describe. This done, my anxieties were not over. It was but the beginning of the end. The leave-taking was only half done, for I parted with the mother and the wife in Rajkot, where I was educated. But my brother and friends came to see me off as far as Bombay. The scene that took place there was no less effective. The collisions with my caste fellows in Bombay defy description, for Bombay is the place where they chiefly live. In Rajkot, I did not meet with any such opposition worthy of the name. It was my misfortune to live in the heart of the city of Bombay, where they most abound, so I was hemmed in on all sides. I could not go out without being pointed and stared at by someone or other. At one time, while I was walking near the town hall, I was surrounded and hooted by them, and my poor brother had to look at the scene in silence. The culminating point was reached when a huge meeting of the caste fellows was summoned by the chief representative. Every member of the caste was called upon to attend the meeting, under pain of forfeiting a fine of 5 annas. I may here mention that, before this step was determined upon, I was pestered with many deputations from them with no avail. At this great meeting, I was seated in the center of the audience. The Patels, as the representatives are called, remonstrated with me very strongly and reminded me of their connection with my father. It may be mentioned that all this was quite a unique experience to me. They literally dragged me out of seclusion, for I was not accustomed to such things. Moreover, my position became more precarious on account of an extreme shyness. Seeing that remonstrance fell flat on me, the head Patel addressed me, in effect, in the following words: "We were your father's friends, and therefore we feel for you. As heads of the caste, you know our power. We are positively informed that you will have to eat flesh and drink wine in England. Moreover, you have to cross the waters. All this, you must know, is against our caste rules. Therefore, we command you to reconsider your decision, or else the heaviest punishment will be meted out to you. What have you to say to this?" I replied in the following words: "I thank you for your warnings. I am sorry that I cannot alter my decision. What I have heard about England is quite different from what you say. One need not take meat and wine there. As for crossing the waters, if our brethren can go as far as Aden, why could not I go to England? I am deeply convinced that malice is at the root of all these objections." "Very well, then," replied the worthy Patel in anger, "you are not the son of your father." Then, turning to the audience, he went on, "This boy has lost his sense, and we command everyone not to have anything to do with him. He who will support him in any way or go to see him off will be treated as an outcast, and if the boy ever returns, let him know that he shall never be taken into the caste." These words fell like a bombshell upon all. Even the chosen few who had supported me through thick and thin left me alone. I had a great mind to answer the childish taunt, but was prevented from so doing by my brother. Thus, even though I got out of the ordeal safely, my position became worse than ever. Even my brother began to vacillate, though only for a moment. He was reminded of the threat that the pecuniary support from him would cost him not only the money, but his membership of the caste. So although he did not say anything to me in person, he asked some of his friends to persuade me either to reconsider my decision or to defer its execution till the fury had subsided. There could be but one answer from me, and ever since that he never flinched, and in fact, he has not been excommunicated. But the end had not come yet. The intrigues of the cast fellows were always at work. They almost seemed to have scored this time, for they could put off my going for a fortnight. They carried it out thus wise. We went to see a captain of a steamship company, who was requested to say that it would be unwise for me to leave during that time of August because of the rough weather in the sea. My brother would consent to anything but this. Unfortunately, this was the first voyage that I had undertaken, so no one knew whether I was a good sailor or not, though I was helpless. Much against my will, I had to put off the departure. I thought the whole structure would fall to the ground. My brother, having left a note to a friend, requesting him to give me the passage money when the time came, took leave. The parting scene was similar to the one described above. Now I was left alone in Bombay without money to buy the passage. Every hour that I had to wait seemed a year. In the meanwhile, I heard that another Indian gentleman was about to leave for England. This news was godsend to me. I thought I would be allowed to go now. I made use of the note and was refused the money I had to make preparations within 24 hours. I was in a dreadful flutter. Without money, I felt as if I was a bird without wings. A friend whom I shall always thank came to the rescue and advanced the passage money. I bought the ticket, telegraphed to my brother, and sailed for England on the 4th September, 1888. Such were my chief difficulties, which spread over nearly 5 months. It was a time of terrible anxiety and torture. Now hopeful, and now despondent, I dragged along, always trying my best, and then depending upon God to show me the cherished goal. Next question was, on your arrival in England, of course, you were face to face with the flesh-eating problem. How did you solve it? I was overwhelmed with gratuitous advice. Well-meaning yet ignorant friends thrust their opinions into unwilling ears. The majority of them said I could not do without meat in the cold climate. I would catch consumption. Mr. Z went to England and caught it on account of his foolhardiness. Others said I might do without flesh, but without wine I could not move. I would be numbed with cold. One went so far as to advise me to take 8 bottles of whiskey, or I should want them after leaving Aden. Another wanted me to smoke, for his friend was obliged to smoke in England. Even medical men, those who had been to England, said the same tale. But as I wanted to come at any price, I replied that I would try my best to avoid all these things, but if they were found to be absolutely necessary, I did not know what I should do. I may here mention my aversion to meat was not so strong then as it is now. I was even betrayed into taking meat about 6 or 7 times at the period when I allowed my friends to think for me. But in the steamer, my ideas began to change. I thought I should not take meat on any account. My mother, before consenting to my departure, exacted a promise from me not to take meat. So I was bound not to take it, only for the sake of the promise. The fellow passengers in the steamer began to advise us, the friend who was with me and myself, try it. They said I would require it after leaving Aden. When this turned out untrue, I was to require it after crossing the Red Sea. And on this proving false, a fellow passenger said, "The weather has not been severe, but in the Bay of Biscay you will have to choose between death and meat and wine." That crisis too passed away safely. In London too, I had to hear such remonstrances. For months, I did not come across any vegetarian. I passed many anxious days arguing with a friend about the sufficiency of the vegetable diet. But at that time, having but little knowledge of arguments other than humanitarian in favor of vegetarianism, I got the worst of it as the friend scouted the idea of humanity in such discussions. At last, I sealed his tongue by telling him I would sooner die than break the promise to my mother. "Humph," said he, "childishness, rank superstition. But since, even after coming here, you are superstitious enough to believe in such nonsense, I cannot help you any more. I only wish you had not come to England." He never afterwards pressed the point seriously, except perhaps once, though ever since that, took me for little more than a fool. In the meanwhile, I remembered once to have passed by a vegetarian restaurant. It was the Porridge Bowl. I asked a gentleman to direct me there, but instead of reaching there, I saw the Central Restaurant, and went there and had some porridge for the first time. I did not at first enjoy it, but I liked the pie which I had for the second course. It was there that I first bought some vegetarian literature, among which was a copy of A Plea for Vegetarianism by H.S. Salt, after reading which I adopted vegetarianism from principle. Till then I considered flesh to be a superior diet from a scientific point of view. Moreover, it was there that I came to know the existence of the Vegetarian Society of Manchester. But I did not take any active interest in it. I did now and then read the Vegetarian Messenger, and that was all. My knowledge of the vegetarian dates from a year and a half. It was at the International Vegetarian Congress that I may be said to have known the London Vegetarian Society. The Congress was sitting, I knew, by the kind courtesy of Mr. Josiah Oldfield, who heard of me from a friend, and was good enough to ask me to attend it. In conclusion, I am bound to say that, during my nearly 3 years' stay in England, I have left many things undone, and have done many things which perhaps I might better have left undone. Yet I carry one great consolation with me. I shall go back without having taken meat or wine, and that I know from personal experience that there are so many vegetarians in England. Hello, dear listeners. You were listening to the article published by The Vegetarian 20th June 1891, an interview of Mahatma Gandhi, and the article is called Why He Went to England. In the next episodes, let's read some letters he wrote after his education.